Welcome to My Turn Life Coaching with me, Rikki Schwartz. If you're like most people, you've spent your entire life focusing on the demands of parenting, of relationships, of your livelihood. Much like you've been riding in a life-powered bobsled, leaning into what others expect of you. But I'm here to help you reclaim your life. I want to embolden you to raise your hand today and every day and say, "It's my turn." Hello, everyone. I'm Rikki Schwartz, and welcome to It's My Turn Life Coaching, Reclaim Your Life on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with us for the next hour, and let's see if we can begin to get the seeds of reclaiming your life to take root. And then please join me every second and fourth Wednesday of every month, noon Pacific time, and my expert guests and I will do our best to give you the tools you need to finally say, it's my turn. On today's show, I'm going to be talking about procrastination. I've spent years and years researching the psychological reasons behind it. Why? Because I've spent years and years watching procrastination complicate and compromise the lives of smart, competent loved ones and clients. And I always wanted to understand the reasons behind why we choose to procrastinate when we know it will hurt us. So my goal here today is to try to describe, in the 55 minutes I have or so, what I found to be the preeminent theories behind procrastination and what experts say can be done about it. So as always, I start every interview asking my guests, what are your top core values? So because I'm my guest today, I will ask myself, Rikki, what are your top core values? And what I ask my life clients to do, my life coaching clients, is to take their core values and turn them into core value statements. So that's what I'm going to share with you today, my core value statements. So my first one is empathy powers my relationships. Probably has since I was a little girl. Empathy powers my relationships. 2, excellence is the goal in all things I do. 3, passion fuels my perseverance. If my tank starts to get empty and I don't have a passion for it, it's harder for me to persevere. 4, my value is measured by my service to others. And 5, core values drive all of my life decisions. So those other core values, that's how I make key decisions based on those values. So before I get started, I'm going to recommend you guys take some notes during the show. There's going to be a lot of information. I think you're going to have a lot of ahas. A lot of things are going to resonate with you. And I don't want you to miss any of that stuff. Now, if you want to kind of sit back and just relax, that's fine, because I'm going to send you a copy of a summary of what I'm presenting today by email if you ask me for it. And I'll tell you how at the end of the show. But still write down stuff that you might want to review once you get that summary. So I have a paper and pencil ready. I think you might find it helpful. Okay, so let's set the table a little bit. First of all, let's define procrastination. Procrastination is defined as the act of unnecessarily postponing decisions or actions. Unnecessarily being the key word there. And it's a trap that many of us fall into. In fact, according to my research, 95% of people procrastinate to some degree. But this show and my research in general is focused on the chronic procrastinators. And likely you know who you are, and your friends and family and colleagues definitely know who you are. So in a kind of a strange way, although alcoholism is linked to biological elements, I kind of view them the same way, alcoholism and procrastinating. Because the alcoholic, despite instead of the casual drinker, who has an occasional drink from time to time, the alcoholic sustains a pattern, keyword number 1, of drinking excessively despite negative consequences. Key phrase number 2, despite negative consequences. And ironically, the consequences of alcoholism and the consequences of chronic procrastination are often pretty close. Guilt, shame, reduced productivity, anxiety, anger of friends, family, and colleagues, failure to achieve important goals, jeopardizing promotions, and sometimes even jeopardizing employment altogether. So I'm talking about, I'm not talking about the casual procrastinator. I'm talking about what I have made up a term to be procrastinaholics. I will be talking about procrastinaholics, meaning those who feel or act trapped by the habits and impulses of procrastination, trapped. It's also important to note that procrastinaholics often promise themselves that things will be different next time. Another clear sign that differentiates casual procrastinators from the procrastinaholics. So let's start where we have to start all the time in my life coaching, when I'm teaching clients, leadership training, when I'm having a session, when I'm having these shows. Always start with awareness, because Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. And I believe nothing is closer to the truth than that. So how do you know if you're a procrastinaholic? So we're going to start with the description of a procrastinaholic and see if any of the following 15 symptoms sound familiar. Number one, you often find yourself performing tasks that you had genuinely intended to do or promised others you would do days or weeks before. So you're doing tasks that you promised were going to get done a lot sooner. Number two, when you're planning an event, like a meeting or a party, you wait until the very last minute to make the necessary arrangements, often to the detriment of the event or the meeting. So you're planning it, but you always wait till the last minute. Number three, you wait to return emails and phone calls until the time is right, but the time is never right. Number four, you find that jobs or tasks are delayed time and time again, even when all you have to do is sit down at your desk for 10 minutes and you could knock it off, but still you delay it. Number five, you're always rushing to complete tasks on time, often being forced to work into all hours of the night. Back in college days, we called that pulling all-nighters, even when we had plenty of time to complete the task. So we're always rushing to complete them. Number six, you hate calendars. You hate calendars, you hate to-do lists, because in my estimation, it boxes you in. Procrastinators do not like to be boxed in. Number one, it makes them anxious, but number two, they always need to leave time in their calendar open because they've always put things off to the last minute. So you don't care for calendars. If you populate them at all, you don't go back and look at them. Number seven, you're plagued by anxiety, sleeplessness, overeating, undereating, a tightness in your chest or your stomach that comes from putting things off to the last minute and being afraid you're not going to meet a deadline. So you're plagued by that deadline anxiety. Number eight, your friends and family and colleagues complain all the time about your tendency to wait to the last minute. It's generally not a surprise to you when any of them do that. And it jeopardizes your relationships very oftentimes, particularly employment relationships, colleagues, and spousal relationships. Number nine, you have missed or nearly missed critical deadlines, even when you had plenty of time to meet them. You miss or nearly miss them. Number 10, you often experience shame or guilt related to your failure to get things done. Shame or guilt. Number 11, you rarely start a task you're given immediately or even shortly after you've been given it. To you, the deadline is what's going to govern that. You're never going to do something right away when you've been given a task. And likewise, when deadlines are approaching, you often waste time by doing other things. And I'm not even talking about fun things. I'm not even talking about inviting things. A procrastinator might decide to clean their bathroom grout instead of filling out a time-sensitive loan application. So you waste time doing things that should be way lower on your priority list. Number 13, like I mentioned, you let deadlines drive your behavior. You hardly ever finish a task sooner than a deadline requires you to finish it. Number 14, when you're faced with a huge task, you wait to start it until you think you have time to finish it. You don't consider breaking it up into small bites. So when you're faced with something big, you don't start it until you think you'll have time to finish it. And lastly, 15, you're constantly saying, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. But then you don't. So those are the 15 of procrastinaholism. Now let's take a look to see if any of the following 7 excuses, self-talk, or talk that you share with other people sound familiar in terms of justifying the procrastination. So the first one is probably one of my favorites. I work better under pressure. I always work better under pressure, which to me, by the way, kind of sounds like I drive better when I'm drunk. It has that same ring to it. So I work better under pressure. Number 2, I don't have the time right now to give it my full attention. That kind of goes back to the reason we mentioned earlier. I don't have time to give it my full attention, so I'm not going to give it any attention. Number 3, I'm too overwhelmed to think about it right now. Just too overwhelmed. Can't even think about it. Number 4, it doesn't need to be done right now. It can wait. It doesn't need to be done right now. Number 5, I'll do it right after I fill in the blank. Do the dishes, do the laundry, make the lunches, but then you don't. So I'll do it right after I fill in the blank. Number 6 is a favorite. Something came up. Oh, I meant to do it yesterday and something came up, but something comes up all the time. Number 7, it's better to wait until I'm feeling more inspired, till I'm more in the mood, till the mood strikes me. It's better to wait until I'm feeling more motivated. So those are the 7. I have to believe that these either sound familiar to you for yourself or for people that you love. So that's kind of a good beginning to awareness, right? This is where we recognize ourselves. This is where we hear ourselves or the folks that we live or work with. This is where we start to understand, that is procrastinaholism. That's just not the occasional put things off. So now we know what procrastination looks and sounds like. The bigger question is, why on earth do we procrastinate? Why do we choose to do something that has and will hurt us? And I consider this incredibly important information to help procrastinaholics to stop judging themselves, to stop beating themselves up about their behavior by understanding the human nature and the psychology behind it. On the website solvingprocrastination.com, there's an article called Why People Procrastinate, the Psychology and Causes of Procrastination. And it does a great job of breaking down the main psychological mechanisms behind our procrastination. The article explains it as follows. When we need to get something done, we rely on self-control in order to will ourselves to do it. That self-control generally needs to be supported by our motivation in order to help us get things done in a timely manner. So self-control and motivating factors work hand in hand to get things done. But there's these demotivating factors. There's these hindering factors that I'm going to go into in the next segment. And those outweigh your self-control and your motivation. Those get in the way of that balance. And when they outweigh the self-control and motivation, we end up procrastinating either indefinitely or until we reach a point in time where we can balance. The balance shifts the other way. So right now we're going to take our first break. When we come back, I'm going to do a deep dive into those demotivating and hindering factors. Back in 3. And we're back. You're listening to My Turn Life Coaching, Reclaim Your Life with me, Rikki Schwartz. Our topic today is procrastination. So in the last segment, we looked at what procrastination looks like. And now I want to read a list of what I mentioned in that segment, those 15 demotivating or hindering factors that get in the way of our self-control and our motivation. As you listen to each of the 15, concentrate on which ones resonate with you the most. Remember, you can't address or limit the power of these factors unless you know what they are and whether they apply to you. So one of the demotivators is abstract or improbable goals. For example, goals such as get fit or start exercising are pretty vague, so they're likely to lead more so to procrastination. Conversely, a goal such as go to the gym every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, work out on the treadmill for 30 minutes at 3.7 miles an hour. Now you have a concrete goal and you're much more likely to take action. Number 2, another of the demotivators is rewards are too far in the future. Rewards are far in the future. So often we procrastinate on tasks which are associated with rewards that we will only receive long after completing the task. And as you probably know, people in general tend to discount the value of rewards that are far in the future. Instead, we like to do things that are rewarding us in the short term. For example, and I'm going to use health and exercising quite a bit for my examples, forgive me. We all know that eating healthy foods and exercising is going to lead to weight loss, but not today and not tomorrow. So that's why it's so difficult to put off starting a diet, so easy to put off starting a diet and an exercise regime, because most of us are really enjoying our McDonald's and most of us don't like to exercise. So the rewards are too far in the future. Number 3, a demotivator is a subconscious disconnect from our future self. And this is kind of a strange one. It's a lot like rewards are too far in the future, but this disconnect from our future selves causes us to think that my present self shouldn't have to worry about the future, since my future self will be the one who has to deal with all the consequences of my negative behavior. Or my future self will be the one who gets to reap the rewards of my positive behavior. So again, for example, we might delay when it comes to eating healthy, even if our doctor says you really should, because the harmful impact of our present diet is only going to start to become a serious issue in a couple of years or 5 years, maybe 10 years. And we view that subconsciously as someone else's problem, our future self's problem. Number 4, another demotivating factor is overinflated optimism. I'm going to pick this as one of the more common ones. So we sometimes procrastinate on tasks because we're unrealistically optimistic about our ability to complete those tasks in the future. This optimism generally relates to 2 different delusions. 1, an overestimation of the time we're actually going to have to complete the task, or 2, an overestimation of our ability to complete the task within a certain time frame. So the real worst case scenario comes when the 2 conflate. I've got plenty of time tomorrow. Besides, it's only going to take 15 minutes, when in fact tomorrow you have 5 minutes and it's going to take an hour. Number 5, another demotivating factor is an unrealistic focus on future options. I have a number of clients and friends who fall prey to this one. Procrastinaholics sometimes avoid taking action in the present because they intend or hope to pursue a much more attractive course of action in the future. So this mindset leads to long-term procrastination and can persist even in cases when the person procrastinating never does any of them. So for example, we might avoid starting exercising on our own at home because we plan to join a gym and start a very detailed workout regime later, despite the fact that getting started now at home would still be beneficial and wouldn't prevent us from switching to a more serious exercise regime in the future. So unrealistic focus on future options. Number 6, a hindering factor is indecisiveness. We often procrastinate because we can't make decisions in a timely manner. For example, again, we might delay starting to diet because we can't decide which diet to follow: keto, Atkins, vegan, vegetarian, and so forth. Number 7, a hindering factor is anxiety about the task itself, either because it's so big or because of its implications. So for example, we might feel anxious about checking our bills, so we repeatedly delay doing so, even though this avoidance will inevitably make the problem quite a bit worse. This particular thing leads to what we call a negative feedback loop, where we feel anxious about a certain task, which causes us to procrastinate instead of doing it, which makes us even more anxious, which causes us to procrastinate even further. That's the negative feedback loop that anxiety can lead to if it's related to procrastination. Number 8, another hindering factor is called perfectionism. And perfectionism can lead to procrastination in 2 primary ways. Either the perfectionism makes us so afraid of making any mistake that we end up not taking any action at all. Or, probably more in my case, the perfectionism makes us so worried about doing something that has any flaws that we end up reworking the project indefinitely and never completing it. Number 9, another hindering factor is fear of failure or negative feedback. Fear of failure. So this impacts those who suffer from high levels of self-doubt in general, particularly among those who are prone to having irrational beliefs about their abilities or inabilities. So how afraid someone is of failing is also related to how important the task is. So the more important the task, the more likely these folks who are afraid of failure will procrastinate. Fear of failure. Number 10, another demotivating factor is low self-efficacy. Low self-efficacy, either in general or related to the task at hand. And that's pretty linked to perfectionism. It's pretty linked to fear of failure. Self-efficacy reflects our belief in our ability to successfully achieve our goals. And in some cases, having a low degree of self-efficacy can cause us to procrastinate. So in other words, we don't think we're going to be able to do it. So we're given a task we don't think we can handle. We delay getting it started, or we delay doing it all because we're thinking, why bother? I'm just going to fail at it anyway. So low self-efficacy. Number 11, another hindering factor is self-handicapping. This is one of my favorites. We sometimes procrastinate as a way of placing barriers in our own way. Why? So that if and when we fail, we can attribute the failure to the procrastination, I didn't have enough time, rather than to our abilities to have otherwise done better. So for example, I think the most common example is when students, or Jack, I'll say, might put off studying for a test, so much so that he isn't able to adequately review all of the material. But he does that because he prefers knowing that it's his failure to have left himself enough time that caused him to do well on the exam, to do unwell on the exam, versus knowing he failed because he was unable to comprehend the material well enough. So we self-handicap so we can blame the procrastination instead of our own inability to do whatever the task is, or our perceived inability to do whatever the task is. Number 12, another hindering factor is self-sabotage. This one's more common than you would think. We sometimes procrastinate due to our tendency to engage in self-defeating behaviors, which means we're actively trying to hurt our own progress. For example, we might delay applying for a new job, even though we know it's an amazing opportunity for a career advancement. But we feel, subconsciously or otherwise, that we don't deserve to be in a better place in life than others, particularly those we may work alongside. So self-sabotage, related to the belief that you don't think you deserve whatever it is you're going to reap from doing the task. Number 13, another hindering factor is attention deficit disorder, ADD. Research shows that there's a very strong correlation between engaging in ADD-related behaviors and procrastination, due to the high level of distractibility and impulsivity that goes along with ADD. And I will tell you that one of my closest friends in the world suffers from ADD, and I had never put the two together. I had never realized that his procrastination is directly related to his ADD. A person might procrastinate because their ADD makes it hard for them to concentrate on a single task for very long, especially if it gets boring. So they constantly jump from one task to another without finishing any of them. 14, another demotivating factor is prioritization of short-term feelings. We like how it feels right now doing whatever we're doing. So we might delay cleaning the bathtub because we want to watch TV or play video games or do something that's a lot more fun. So those activities give us instant gratification, and we'd rather do those than those that do not. Another demotivating factor, the last one, number 15, is sensation seeking, one of my favorites. Some people actually prefer to procrastinate because they like to wait until right before the deadline to start working on a task in order to add pressure and challenge and excitement to those tasks. For example, a student might wait until the night before a class presentation is due to start working on it because he feels that doing so will make the otherwise boring act of preparing the presentation quite a bit more exciting. So by this time, I have another sneaking suspicion that a lot of you are vigorously nodding your heads, and that's good. That's the beginning of awareness. And it should also be the beginning to having compassion for yourself and others who procrastinate. And that's really, really one of my primary goals here. Procrastination can be ugly and frustrating and often risky for everyone, but judging it does not improve it. Only understanding improves it. So right now we're going to take our second break. You're listening to My Turn Life Coaching, Reclaim Your Life with me, Rikki Schwartz. And so far I've defined procrastination, described what it looks like, listed several examples of it, and described the psychological factors behind it. When we come back, I want to spend the third segment of the show introducing 4 types of procrastinators. So stay tuned. We will be back in 3 minutes. And we're back. You're listening to My Turn Life Coaching, Reclaim Your Life with me, Rikki Schwartz. Our topic today is procrastination. In this segment, the third segment, in my continuing effort to help you guys recognize yourselves, because that's the key here, I'm going to introduce the work of Schiller and Marisa Boisberg. They're the co-owners of a company called Accountability Works in California, where they coach professionals on accomplishing their goals without sacrificing their health. Allie and Marisa take many of the demotivating and hindering factors that we talked about in the last segment and kind of shuffle the deck a little bit and group them into 3 different avoidance patterns of thinking or avoidance patterns of behavior. And they refer to them as avoidance archetypes. And as I said, there's 3. We'll go into them in detail, but the 3 are the performer, the overbooker, and the novelty seeker. So we're going to break each of those avoidance archetypes down into their characteristics, their challenges, and their solutions. So let's start with the avoidance archetype they call the performer. Characteristics of the performer. Performers are often heard saying, and I mentioned this earlier in the first segment, I work best under pressure. Often heard saying, I work best under pressure. And as I mentioned in that segment, these types of procrastinators force themselves to focus by shrinking the time they have to tackle a task, often related to the sensation-seeking factor that we talked about earlier. They tell themselves it's more exciting this way to do something that otherwise would be mundane or boring. So they deliberately create that pressure to create excitement. For many of my clients, another real reason behind the performer archetype is perfectionism, which also leads to self-handicapping. I mentioned both of those earlier. The performers like this say to themselves, if I don't give myself enough time, there's no way the task can be done to my unreasonably high standards anyway. So they deliberately create an environment where they can blame the procrastination on the poor performance. Other performers defend their premise, and this is my all-time favorite, I hear it over and over and over and over and over again, that they work best under pressure because they are certain that the 11th hour saves have always worked for them in the past. That's why they say I work best under pressure. Those 11th hour saves are in their history and they've always worked. And what I tell my clients in particular is, at what cost? At what cost to your peace of mind? At what cost to your health? At what cost to your relationships, your family, your work? So they may work, but they're not a great approach to getting things done. What's the biggest challenge of the performer? Getting started. So what's the solution for the performer? Set a start date. When you focus on when you're going to begin a task and not when you plan to end it, you won't fall victim to this way of thinking nearly as often. So set a start date. That's the performer solution. The next avoidance archetype is the overbooker. Characteristics of the overbooker, what do you hear him say all the time? I'm just too busy. Oh, I'm so busy. My calendar is just packed. And procrastinators are professional at filling up their calendars. And they always describe themselves as being overwhelmed. So I'm so busy is probably the excuse I hear the most often from my clients in defense of the procrastination. And usually I'll challenge them to make sure that they're not using busyness as their avoidance archetype. Where rather than facing a challenge head on or admitting they just don't want to do something, it's easier to place the blame on having too much to do. These folks are also easy to spot when, as I described earlier, they always find time for other things, again, that are not particularly important or fun or inviting, that should definitely fall lower on the priority list. And my example I gave is, you might decide to clean your bathroom grout instead of filling out a time-sensitive loan application. So they find time to do lots of things, just not what they need to do as soon as possible. Interestingly, some of the busiest clients I work with get the most done, for sure. And often it's because they work smart. Their timing decisions are intentional and strategic. They're not a slave to this last minute type thinking. And the busier they are, the more strategic they are at planning their schedules. So I would contend that the busier you are, the more critical it is to avoid any procrastination or that negative feedback loop I talked about. I get anxious about doing it. I procrastinate doing it. That makes me more anxious. That makes me procrastinate it more. That negative feedback becomes almost intolerable. What's the biggest challenge of the overbooker? Creating chaos to avoid facing what you need to face right now. And it's usually not the task itself. It's what's behind it. So the biggest challenge of the overbooker is creating this kind of chaos. And the solution for the overbooker? Take a moment of introspection. Ask yourself, what am I really avoiding? What am I really avoiding? Is it the task or something behind it? The third and final avoidance archetype is the novelty seeker. And my friend with ADD that I mentioned earlier, he's a novelty seeker for sure. Characteristics of the novelty seeker, they're often heard saying, oh, I just had the best idea. I just had the best idea. So they have kind of a terminal case of shiny object syndrome. They're constantly coming up with new projects to take on, and then they get bored with them a short time later. So they're intrigued by the latest trend. They're quick to implement it, but not to follow through. Novelty seekers are really good at making decisions and taking action, but they end up inadvertently losing a lot of time because they burn out and they don't take consistent action in one direction long enough to see the results they crave. Many of my entrepreneurial clients fit into that category. What's the biggest challenge of the novelty seeker? Completion. Solution for the novelty seeker, make it stick, literally. Write your ideas, your new ideas on sticky notes, put them somewhere. You don't want to forget them, but don't pursue them until you finish what you're currently working on. So finally, I want to close out this segment by talking about 4 categories of irrational thinking that are even more steeped in psychology and emotional stability than the ones I've already presented. So according to Nathaniel Cilley, spelled Cilley, he's a licensed mental health counselor and associate fellow at the Albert Ellis Psychotherapy Training Institute in New York. And much like I've been saying, he says you need to find the irrational thoughts that are fueling your anxiety, which he believes is the cause of most chronic procrastination before you can tackle it. So how ironic is it that it's anxiety that causes the procrastination, and then the procrastination causes more anxiety? So again, back to that negative feedback loop. So he essentially mirrors what Ali and Marisa said, that chronic procrastination reflects an avoidance or a denial strategy. But then he goes a step further to say that the avoidance is often a sign of an underlying unresolved emotional problem that often leads to irrational beliefs, which then lead to procrastination. So he says there's 4 core irrational beliefs. First is irrational demands, which are illustrated by should and must statements. I should go to the gym 4 times a week, or my bed should be made at all times when not in use. The second one is called irrational self-downing, which is defining oneself on the basis of a single aspect or outcome, such as thinking if I mess up one work project, then I'm a failure. The third one is called irrational awfulizing, which is imagining a situation as bad as it can possibly be, awfulizing. And the fourth one is irrational low frustration tolerance, which is sometimes referred to as I can't stand it-itis. I can't stand it. Namely, it's an irrational belief that a struggle is just too intolerable. And often we see those last two, awfulizing and low frustration intolerance, dovetailing. So if we're experiencing chronic procrastination, a lot of times it's because number one, we're awfulizing the task. And number two, we set our frustration tolerance so low that there's no way we're going to be able to do it. Sometimes when we think something is too difficult to do, even if we're thinking irrationally, we put it off. So in this and the last segment, I listed multiple reasons as to why people procrastinate. And as I said, that information is invaluable from a practical perspective, because understanding reasons behind your procrastination is literally the only hope you have of freeing yourself from it. So as an example, if you decide that one of the reasons you procrastinate is that your goals are very abstract, you can make sure to define more concrete goals for yourself. Or if one of the reasons you discover is prioritization of short-term mood, meaning it feels good right now, I don't want to stop, plan to listen to a favorite Audible book while you're cleaning out your closets. So you kind of combine a feel good with a have to do. Or if you identify that your avoidance archetype, according to Ali and Marisa, is novelty seeking, write down your ideas on separate sticky notes, but finish one before you begin another. Or lastly, if you identify that you practice any of the 4 sets of core irrational beliefs, irrational demands, self-downing, awfulizing, low frustration tolerance, you may want to find an accountability partner with whom to bounce off those irrational beliefs. And we're going to talk more about accountability partners in the next segment. So yeah, in the next segment, I'm going to lay out some specific ideas for addressing procrastination. But as a lead-in into it, if you think about all the information I presented during these last 2 segments, you'll realize that virtually all of the reasons for procrastination involve some kind of magical or unrealistic or irrational thinking at their core. So the overarching trick is to identify when you're using that kind of irrational thinking to support procrastination, challenge yourself. Ask yourself over and over and over, is what I'm telling myself honest and truly steeped in reality and in my past experiences? In short, keep challenging yourself with the statement, is that true? What you're thinking right now, the reason you're putting this off, is that really true? And again, if you can't do it by yourself, which is oftentimes difficult for folks to do, that's where the value of an accountability partner comes in. So let's take our last break. You are listening to My Turn Life Coaching, Reclaim Your Life with me, Rikki Schwartz. And when we come back, we're going to talk more specifically about how to stop procrastinating. Back in 3. You're listening to My Turn Life Coaching, Reclaim Your Life with me, Rikki Schwartz. And today I've been talking about procrastination. In this last segment, I want to describe the path to stopping it But please keep in mind, by now it should be clear that these demotivators and this irrational thinking and these hindering factors that lead to procrastination are deeply embedded in our psyche. So I don't want to oversimplify the process for stopping the behavior, but these are practical considerations for starting you on the right path to doing so. So as I mentioned at the very end of the last segment, one of my favorite approaches to getting to the root or the core of unrealistic or irrational thinking is to work with an accountability partner. The partner you pick should be someone who knows your proclivities well. So either a spouse, a best friend, a counselor, a therapist, a life coach, any of those folks that are going to be able to be candid and direct with you. The job of the accountability partner is to help you drill down to the root cause that led to the irrational or the unrealistic thinking. So for example, if you're routinely putting off writing a presentation and you or your accountability partner suspect it's due to irrational awfulizing or perfectionism or low self-efficacy or fear of failure, this particular exercise, which has two names, I call it two things. One is called the worst case scenario exercise, and the other is called the and what would that mean exercise. So this is how it works. Your accountability partner might begin by saying, what would happen if you finish your presentation? And you might say, I'll give it. And then the accountability partner would ask, and what would that mean? And you might say, everyone in my division will see me give it. And then your accountability partner might say, and what would that mean? And you might say, everyone will see me look and sound foolish. Don't stop there. You'd be tempted to stop there, but keep drilling. The partner then says, and what would that mean? You might say, everyone will find out how much of an imposter I am at work. Still don't stop there. Still drill down further. The partner asks, what would that mean? You'd say, I would get fired. Don't even stop there. Keep going. The partner says, what would that mean? You might say, I'd never get another job. Keep going. The partner asks, and what would that mean? You might say, my spouse and children would leave me and I would be left destitute and alone. Once you've actually drilled down in very small increments at a time and actually verbalized out loud the absolute worst case scenario that has been preoccupying your brain, it's much easier to identify the irrational thinking in which your procrastination is steeped. Only then can you begin to remove those irrational beliefs on a much more sustainable basis. Okay. All that psychological and theoretical stuff aside, although I think it's crucial to examine all of it, I have 7 practical tips that I have used to combat procrastination with my procrastinaholic clients. Number 1, prioritize tasks based on how important they are instead of the length of the delay to gratification. Number 1, prioritize your tasks based on how important they are. Number 2, remove distractions from your work environment as often as possible. Distractions almost always justify procrastination. Remove them. Number 3, count to 10 before you indulge the impulse to procrastinate. And make no mistake, it is an impulse. Number 4, break large, overwhelming tasks into small and actionable pieces, and then set intermediate deadlines on a task board or a to-do list for yourself. This is extremely helpful to procrastinators because it provides that immediate gratification that they crave that comes from moving an item from the to-do to the done column or just crossing it out on the to-do list. So procrastinators, once they get used to it, come to love to-do lists. Break large tasks into small pieces and put them on a to-do list. Number 5, force yourself to populate and then stick to a calendar. This is the hardest one. This is where I get the most pushback, but I am strongly recommending procrastinaholics force yourself to populate and then live by a realistic calendar. And that calendar is going to have new appointments and tasks, but it's also going to have routine appointments so that you start to block out your time. For example, you might dedicate 3 to 4:30 p.m. every weekday just to return all non-urgent voicemails. It's the only time you're going to do it, between 3 and 4:30 p.m. every weekday. Or you might decide to only schedule face-to-face meetings on the mornings of Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Only face-to-face meetings go at that time. Do your very best not to deviate from that calendar, despite repeated temptations to do so. and there will be they. Number 6, visualize your future self experiencing the outcomes of your completed work. Visualize your future self smiling and sitting in a successful position because of the work that you did. And number 7, and probably most importantly, develop a determination and a belief in your ability to successfully overcome your procrastination. Make it your life's work, because believe me, it is going to influence your life probably more than anything else you do. Be determined and believe you can overcome procrastination. So, ironically, I want to close out this segment with a personal story about finding the why related to a very recent act of procrastination on my part. Let me say at the beginning, I'm not really a procrastinator by nature, but every once in a while, I procrastinate something that's very important and very time sensitive. So of course, when that happens, I, the life coach to myself and others, am compelled to find out why. In this case, I put off aggregating the information for this show until this past Sunday, which was 3 days ago. Whereas usually I'm fully prepared to do a show like at least a month before it. So this was very unexpected, to say the least, particularly considering how much I love doing research for my radio shows, like love it. And especially talking and thinking about this topic in particular, that of procrastination. So I was really surprised. I had even planned to at least begin assembling the narrative weeks ago and was literally mortified to realize I'd left it to this past weekend at all. And then this past Saturday, despite that mortification, I binge watched all episodes of Des on the Sundance Channel, followed by binge watching all episodes of The Nest on BBC, followed by binge watching all 3 seasons of Trying on Apple TV+. And if you're paying attention, that means I deliberately surfed 3 completely different streaming networks to find these shows. I did not stumble onto them accidentally. And all the while I was thinking, you need to get your show info together. You need to get your show info together. So this was really rare for me. So before I could get to the task at hand, I had to explore the whys behind this act of procrastination. And based on what I just presented in this show, this is what I figured out. The solvingprocrastination.com article first exposed, no surprise, a prioritization of short-term good feelings. I do love watching movies. This was accompanied by the hindering factor of overinflated optimism. I had no idea, given my experience and comfort with the subject, that it was going to take 15 uninterrupted hours to complete this. I was thinking more like 3 or 4. So discovering those 2 demotivators was quickly followed by then identifying those of perfectionism and low self-efficacy. Why? Because this is my first radio show without the comfort and the expertise of a professional subject matter expert to interview. And frankly, I was concerned I wouldn't be considered credible. So put all that together, Dr. Silly would have identified also 3 of the 4 core irrational belief categories I fell into. Irrational demands. Every word of what I present has to be crystal clear, riveting, and indisputable. Every single word. Self-downing. If I don't do this show without any flaws, then I shouldn't be hosting any show at all. And irrational awfulizing. What if I experience technical difficulties, or lose my train of thought, or jumble, or mispronounce words, or speak too quickly to be understood, or speak too slowly to be engaging? Everyone will stop listening to my show forever. So no big surprise, actually, that I was procrastinating. So what did I do at 6:30 a.m. Sunday morning before I made my way to the computer to get the work done? I practiced on my own the worst case scenario exercise. And lo and behold, I did not get to, I am going to end up alone and destitute. Instead, I got about as far as, it may not be your best show, but there's little chance that there'll be any widespread or long-term implications. So I felt free to move forward without delay. See, it works. Try it, you'll be amazed. So I want to thank the listeners who took time from your busy days to be with me today. It means more than I can really say. And as I mentioned earlier, if you'd like me to email you a copy of the summary notes from this presentation, feel free to email me at Rikki@myturnlifecoaching.com. Again, that's Rikki@myturnlifecoaching.com. Just say I'd like a copy of your procrastination notes and I'll send them over to you. No charge. And if any listeners are interested in finding out more about my life coaching services and how they're designed to help you reclaim your life, go to myturnlifecoaching.com, myturnlifecoaching.com. And there you can also go to the podcast tab to find recordings of this and all my Transformation Talk radio shows. And if you're not sick of hearing me talk by now, and you're interested in what it looks like to reclaim your life with me as your life coach, tune in tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific time when I will be on the hot seat of the Dr. Pat Show, hosted by Dr. Pat Basile, award-winning radio host, TV commentator, branding consultant, author, speaker, and founder of the Transformation Network. Then please join me 2 weeks from today at noon Pacific time, Wednesday, June 9th, when my guest on my show will be Nate Regier, PhD and founder of Next Element, who will walk us through how to use what's called the process communication model to radically improve the way we communicate with friends, family, and colleagues. And I'm not kidding you, folks, this communication model has changed my life. As always, special thanks to my producer, Jacob Kappas, for always being such an amazing wingman. Finally, I'm going to close out this show as I do every show with one of my favorite quotes related to life transformation. Today's quote is from George Bernard Shaw. He says, if you take too long deciding what to do with your life, you'll find you've already done it. Till next time, be thinking about what you can do to help yourself reclaim your life. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks so much for tuning into My Turn Life Coaching with me, Rikki Schwartz. Now, before you go, ask yourself this question. At my memorial service, what do I want folks to say was my passion? What do I want them to say was my purpose? If you don't know, or you don't think they'll know, then it's time to say it out loud. It's my turn. Visit myturnlifecoaching.com today and let me help you reclaim your life.